So hi, my name is Sam. I work at Transit, and I've been there for 6.5 years. And we use a lot of spannable strings and just span in general. So we're gonna take a look at what we can do with them. So first, how many of you used spannable string before? Okay, pretty much everybody. Okay. So just a little bit of an outline. So what are spannables, what we can do with them, how do they work, and we're gonna create a custom one. So it's low level. So if you already worked with them and had a bunch of issue with them, so you won't learn anything new. Sorry. So what are spannables? Basically, there's different way to style text on Android. You can either style the whole text view with applying text color, text size, or you. Sorry. The first is here's my example text. Basically, it's big, it's bold, and it's red. That's it. So what happens when you want to do something like this? You want to have an underline, you want to have part of the text that is colored or not. In that case, there's no way to do it strictly with just a text view. So that's where Spannable come into lights. So basically, here come the spans. Span is a way to be able to create example like this one, where you have part of the string that is styled differently than the other. So in that case, we can use different, what they call span. Span is a configuration for part of the text. So I don't know if you can read at the bottom, but basically we're gonna use an underline span for the first 4 characters. So here, and then a foreground color span to make the my in red. Same thing with the text in bold at the end. And you have to know the index of the text. So that's pretty much what span does by default. We can take a look at one of the line when you call set span on a spannable string. Spannable string basically is if we go here, the first line, you just pass it a string and then you can apply different regions with different configuration. So when you apply a configuration, that's when you use the set span. In that case, we use the underline span. So basically, what is the thing we want to do with that text region? After that, we use the start index, end index. So basically, in that case, it's for the here. So we start at 0, it's 4 character long. And then we have the flags. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail on what the flag means. In case of span, basically you can use them on static text or you can use them on dynamic text, basically either on text view or edit text. So the flags allow us, when we use edit text, so text that can change, what happens if I start typing or modify the text that is affected by a span. Basically, you have 4 different options. Exclusive, basically if the text change either at the end or at the beginning, it's not going to get affected. So in the case of the here is my super text, here's my text, and then I change it to here's my super texter. If it's exclusive, then only text is going to remain red. And then I can use different flags. So inclusive mean that part is going to be affected also. So in that case, because I appended super at the beginning of the text, it's going to become red. Same thing with the inclusive at the end. And if I do inclusive, both of them are going to get affected when the text change. So how do we apply spans? It all depends on what can change. So earlier we used the spannable string. We talked about text that can change, and you also have what they call span string. It's a string that already contains spannable and they cannot change. So usually you would get them from, if you ever used HTML.from HTML, it's going to create that span string. Basically, it's already, the spans are already applied. So if you had a HTML with bold and stuff like that, and you do HTML from HTML, it's going to return you a span string that you can apply to a text field, but you cannot add more span to it. So it's already there and you just have to use it. If you want to change only the span and not the text, you're going to use the SpannableString, basically what we did earlier with the here's my text. So on the constructor of SpannableString, you pass in a string and you cannot change it anymore. You can only apply different style to different region of that string. And if you want to change both the text and the spans, in the example of if you use spans in edit text, in that case you're going to use SpannableString builder. In that case you can change the text. So in the example where we use the flags, it will be with something like that. So what can we do with span? The platform provide a bunch of them, like a bunch of them. The list goes on and on. It just got somewhere in the middle. There's a couple of notable things. So absolute size span allow you to change the font size. You can have a background span. Basically, it's a highlight. There's the bullet span, just create a bullet point. Image span, you can replace part of the text by an image. So it's going to replace the text. So if you say those 4 characters is that image, those 4 characters are not going to be visible. It's just going to be the image. Those are for assets that you already have, any drawables that you have. Strike through, subscript, superscript. Basically, pretty much anything you would like to do to style your text is already provided. So how do they work? There's 3 types of spans. So you can either affect characters, so only characters, so start index, end index. In that case, that would be characters affecting span. So in the list before, sorry, this one, most of them, except for the bullet span, are characters affecting span. So they only affect the style and not the size. So basically it's only when the text view is drawn or the text is drawn that these are going to be evaluated, because they only change the style and not the layout, so not the size of the text field. You have metrics affecting span. In that case, that would be for the absolute size image. Those can change the text field, the size of the text field. So let's say my text field is text size 20, and then I put an absolute size span of 22. The text field has to increase if I don't want the text to be cut. So basically it's going to be a metric affecting span. That means on the layout pass, it's going to evaluate all the span that implement metric affecting and figure out what is the text field supposed to be sized at. And then you have the paragraph affecting span. So for the bullet, basically paragraph affecting is for anything that is separated by a /n, so a new line. So in the case of bullet, if you have, I don't know, 10 lines, you can apply bullet on all of them, and it's going to create 1 bullet per line. You don't have to specify a bullet span for the first line, a bullet span for the second line, a bullet span for the third line. You just do 1 and it's going to do it for all of them. So how to create a custom span? So we have a small mise en scène. So we have Julia, UI designer, and she come up with a super neat design. She wants this in the application. We could all do it with different views, but basically it's the same text that we want to affect depending on the time. So we don't really want to have, in the case of the one at the bottom, we don't want to have 4 text views for the same thing in a linear layout. That would not be super efficient. It would be better to have it as one with Spannable. Plus, with Spannable, we can do all of those styles with only 1 text view. We just apply different spans instead of having a lot of. If it's 2, then we hide the first 2 because we only need 2 text views. So that kind of logic, usually that's where we do mistakes, because it's easy, but then we go quickly. So with Spannable, it's not that much more complicated, but you don't have to think about it. You just apply the spans correctly and it's going to work. So we're going to take a look at only the first one, just so it doesn't take an hour. So basically, if we want to use only available spans, what we could do is use an absolute span for the 2. So basically increase the font size. Then use a style span to make the font size bold for the 2. and then use an image span. And this is pretty much the result that you would get. In that case, Julia is going to look at you and say, that's not exactly the design I gave you. What happened? And she's like, hell no, you have to fix it and make it better. So in that case, what we want basically is to create a superscript image span. That will be a custom span that we implement that is kind of a mix between superscript and the image span. So when you create, in that case, a metric affecting span, because we want to change the size of the text view, because if you see here, the small image goes outside of the text view that we already had, or else it would show like this. We have to be a metric affecting span. In that case, you have two methods that you have to implement: get size and draw. Get size is the one that's going to be called every time the layout of your text view or if the text is being processed. So you have to return, and it returns an int, which is weird because we want to change either the width and the height. In that case, that int is only the width. So if you want to change the size height-wise, you have to change the font metrics to be able to adjust it. And font metrics, what they represent is these. I don't know if you like these. I don't. Every time I don't remember how they work, and every time I don't use the correct one. But basically, you have, in the case of font metric, I think you only have 4. So you have top, ascent, descent, and bottom. And these are the ones that you're going to be able to move around to be able to make your text field adjust to the correct dimension. So in the case of our superscript image span, what we're going to do is in the get size, we're going to get the bounds of our image, just to be sure that we have the correct size. We have to check that the font metric is not null because I removed it for brevity, but it's annotated at nullable. On some platform and on some older device, it's going to be null. So if you don't check, it just crash. So super neat. If it's null, then you're not screwed. You can create one and apply it to the paint. You can set the font metric to paint. It works sometimes, but not always. So it really depends. If it doesn't work, then now you're screwed. Like there's no way to change the size. You have to figure it out by code and then adjust your text view manually. There's not a lot of device that has those kind of issues. In our case, we just don't handle them. So basically, it's not perfect. It would show like the image not at the correct position, but that's not too much of a pain, but it would be to implement it correctly. So in that case, for the get size, we're going to change the font metric top. So we're going to use the ascent and remove half of the size of the drawable. Basically, I use bottom because a drawable by default is from 0 to height, and height is bottom. So you can use height, but basically it's going to do a subtraction for no reason. In that case, if we go back to the other slide, I'm going to use ascent, so the green line, and then go move it up from half the image size. So it should look pretty much like what Julia is asking for. And for the width, we're going to use basically the width of my drawable. So in that case, again, I use right because it's from 0 to right. So width. So that's pretty much it for the get size. After that, we need to implement the draw. Draw in that case is super simple because it's a drawable. We just need to translate our canvas. So there's a bunch of parameters there. Sorry, the canvas is where you need to basically render and draw your stuff. The text sequence, is the text that you're supposed to render. In our case, it's an image, so we don't really care about that part. Start and end are the start and end index of your Spannable in that text that you received. So in that case, we also don't care. X is where the text field is positioned to draw. So basically, the next character is supposed to be drawn there. So it's the correct values for what we need. The top is coming from the font metrics. The Y is going to be the baseline in that case. So if you draw text on Android with canvas.draw text, you just pass X and Y and it would work automatically. It's going to draw it correctly on the correct baseline and stuff like that. In our case, we don't really want to draw it at the baseline level. We want to have it basically at the top completely of the image, but we wanted to have it sit halfway through the image, halfway through the ascent level. So that's why basically for the translate, we go to X, which is the correct position to start drawing, and then we just go down a little bit so it sits in between. And then we just call drawable.draw on the canvas. Yes. So in that case, I didn't show, but on the constructor of this superscript image span, you just pass in a drawable and it's going to use it. There's one that exists that is called image span, and it takes a drawable as a constructor parameters. So if you have context, you do context.get drawable, and then you pass it in there. So I just removed a bunch of code, so I don't show the constructor, and there will be a parameter at the top. There will be a private member called drawable.
So there's some code we don't see.
Yes, yes. Sorry. So this is really a simple example. If you would love to do exactly the same thing, I would recommend to extend the image span, because this one has a cached version of the drawable, where this one is only, the image span has a cached one because it's a weak pointer, where this one, I only keep a reference, so it's easier. But then you have to release everything, not manually, but yeah, just more performant if you use the other one. The last thing that you really need to do, every time you translate, you have to save and restore, because if you don't do it, the next span is going to receive your Canva that is already translated, and in that case, they're not going to do the correct thing. So if you forget to do either save or restore, actually, if you forget save but do restore, it's going to crash. If you save but don't restore, or don't save, don't restore, basically you're going to see your text to be like all screwed up, because the next part of the text, the next characters, in that case the min, is not going to start drawing at the correct position, because they're also going to do that translate X, so they're going to get like pushed super far away. And in that case, the result would look like this. Yay! And now Julia is super happy, everything works, and you have your new span that you can just use everywhere. That's already it. Any question? Cool. Thank you.